Imagine a quiet hillside, bathed in the soft glow of morning light. The air is filled with the murmur of an expectant crowd, ordinary men and women, their hands calloused from labor, their hearts weighed down by worries, their eyes searching for something they could not yet name. Some had come seeking healing, others hoping for guidance, and many simply curious about the man who had been stirring whispers across towns. And there he sat, not on a throne, not surrounded by grandeur, but on a simple hillside, with the calm authority of someone whose words would ripple across centuries. This was the moment before the world changed. No trumpet sounded, no banners waved, yet the anticipation was palpable. When Jesus opened his mouth, he did not speak of wealth, power, or prestige. He spoke of a kingdom built on surrender, mercy, and humility, a kingdom that flips the values of the world upside down. These words, known today as the Beatitudes, were not gentle encouragements. They were revolutionary truths that challenged everything people thought they knew about blessing and greatness. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. From the very first words, Jesus addressed the ones who knew their own need, those who had nothing to offer but open hearts. In a society where blessing was tied to status, power, and outward appearances, this statement would have stunned the listeners. It was not about being weak. It was about recognizing that true life, true blessing, begins when we stop pretending and start surrendering our need for control. As he continued, each statement built upon the last, guiding the crowd and all of us on a journey from spiritual emptiness to fullness, from mourning to comfort, from weakness to true strength. The Beatitudes invite us to see the world differently, to value mercy over revenge, humility over pride, and peacemaking over conflict. They call us to a higher vision, one where our hearts are aligned with God's purposes, not the fleeting measures of society. Over the next few minutes, we are going to explore these profound teachings together. We will dive into each beatitude, unpacking what it truly means to be blessed in the eyes of God, and how these ancient words still speak directly to our modern lives. Whether you are feeling broken, searching for direction, or simply curious about the wisdom that has inspired millions, this journey is for you. Before we begin, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the rest of this life-changing series. Share this video with someone who needs encouragement today, because the message of the Beatitudes is not just for one generation, it is for all who are willing to listen, reflect, and be transformed. Let us step onto that hillside together and hear the words that have the power to leave us truly speechless. As the crowd settled on the hillside, the air thick with anticipation, Jesus began to speak. And it quickly became clear that what they were about to hear was unlike anything they had encountered before. There were no grandiose promises of earthly wealth, no exaltation of the powerful or celebrated, no claims that the strong or learned would automatically find favor. Instead, every word he spoke seemed to turn the expectations of the world upside down, revealing a wisdom that ran counter to the natural instincts of ambition, pride, and self-sufficiency. The Beatitudes were not just statements of comfort, they were a radical call to a different kind of life. A life in which the truest blessings come not from accumulation, influence, or recognition, but from humility, surrender, and a deep reliance on God. For those listening, it was a revolutionary idea. To be blessed was not to climb higher, gain more, or prove oneself in the eyes of others. It was to empty oneself of pretense, to lay aside the armor of self-reliance, and to acknowledge a profound need for something greater than human achievement. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said, and it was not merely a poetic expression. It was an invitation into a life that valued dependence on God over dependence on oneself. In a culture where social status and material gain often defined worth, this teaching flipped the entire scale of what it meant to be successful or honored, suggesting that those who recognized their limitations and vulnerabilities were the very ones who would inherit the promise of heaven. It was a subtle, yet seismic, subversion of the world's metrics for blessing. The Beatitudes continued, each one layering upon the last, crafting a vision of life that was beautifully paradoxical and deeply challenging. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. He continued, calling attention to the sacredness of sorrow, the kind that comes not from fleeting disappointment but from a profound awareness of the world's brokenness and our own complicity in its pain. Mourning, in this context, was not weakness, it was an acknowledgement of the realities of human existence, an openness to God's transformative presence, and a willingness to allow sorrow to soften the heart rather than harden it. It revealed that blessing is not always accompanied by joy in the conventional sense. Sometimes it comes through the quiet, unseen work of grief and introspection, shaping the soul for mercy, empathy, and depth of character. Meekness followed as another countercultural principle. In a society that celebrated assertiveness and dominance, Jesus elevated meekness not as passive submission, but as controlled strength, a deliberate choice to trust God's timing and authority rather than asserting one's own. It was the strength of restraint, the courage to step back when power could be seized, and the wisdom to act only when guided by principles higher than personal gain. Through this, he revealed a deeper layer of blessing, that the power of the kingdom is not measured by domination, influence, or immediate success, but by the patience and integrity of those who wait on God's guidance. Hunger and thirst for righteousness painted an image of a soul that refuses to settle for mediocrity, that craves not worldly recognition but a life aligned with divine justice and holiness. This kind of longing demanded surrender as well, not surrender to weakness, but surrender to God's design and purposes. It was a hunger that propelled action, fostered accountability, and nurtured transformation, promising that those who pursue righteousness with authentic hearts would find fulfillment, not in human accolades, but in the presence and sustenance of God Himself. Mercy and purity of heart further unfolded this tapestry of upside-down values, showing that blessing is not a reward for perfection, but the reflection of a heart shaped by grace and integrity. To extend mercy was to participate in God's own character, to mirror the forgiveness and compassion freely given, even when it was difficult or undeserved. Purity of heart required sincerity and authenticity, a single-minded devotion to what is holy, rejecting hypocrisy and embracing truth within one's own life. Both blessings called for internal transformation, emphasizing that the kingdom's values operate on the level of character and intent, rather than superficial appearances. Peacemaking brought the vision into practical action, demonstrating that true blessing involves engagement, courage, and reconciliation. It was not about avoiding conflict or seeking easy comfort. It was about stepping into tension, building bridges where walls had stood for generations, and actively pursuing restoration over retaliation. Those who embraced peacemaking became living reflections of God's kingdom, showing through tangible action what it meant to live under divine authority and embody divine principles in a broken world. Finally, Jesus spoke of persecution for righteousness, a reality that made many uncomfortable because it highlighted the cost of living by these countercultural values. To follow the Beatitudes meant that the world might resist, ridicule, or oppose those who embraced humility, mercy, purity, and peace. Yet, in the very act of enduring opposition, there was a profound confirmation. The kingdom of heaven belongs not to the safe, the popular, or the unchallenged, but to those who reflect God's values with courage and fidelity. The blessings, therefore, are not abstract promises, they are a transformative path, a way of life that shapes character, aligns hearts with God, and offers eternal significance far beyond worldly measurement. The Beatitudes, in essence, rewrite the rules of life. They invite each listener then and now to see blessing not as accumulation or acclaim, but as a journey of surrender, compassion, integrity, and courage, promising that those who walk this path with sincerity and faith will discover a richness and fulfillment that the world cannot provide, a satisfaction rooted not in status or power, but in alignment with God's eternal kingdom. The hillside was quiet now, the kind of silence that carries expectation and weight, as the crowd leaned forward, waiting for the words that had already begun to ripple through the minds of those gathered. Jesus looked over them, ordinary faces marked by toil, worry, and longing, and he began to speak, not as a teacher proclaiming rules or doctrines, but as someone unveiling a reality far greater than they could have imagined. His opening words were simple, yet seismic. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In that single declaration, the entire foundation of human aspiration and achievement was being gently, yet irrevocably, turned on its head. The people, conditioned to equate blessing with wealth, influence, or visible success, would have felt an initial shock. But those with hearts attuned to the truth felt a stirring, a recognition that something deeper was being offered, something that transcended the fleeting measures of the world. To be poor in spirit was not to claim worthlessness or to retreat in despair. It was to acknowledge the limitations, failures, and fragility of the self, to admit honestly that human strength and wisdom are never enough to satisfy the deepest longings of the soul. It was the surrender that precedes wisdom, the humility that opens the heart to transformation. Jesus was inviting each person to lay down the masks, the performances, and the pretenses that society demands, to come before God not with confidence in their own merit, but with open hands and honest hearts, willing to receive a life and a blessing that cannot be earned but only given. This acknowledgement of spiritual need became the key that unlocked the rest of the Beatitudes, setting a path where every subsequent promised comfort for mourning, inheritance for the meek, satisfaction for those who hunger for righteousness flowed naturally from the realization that true life begins with dependence on God rather than reliance on self. As the words sank in, it became clear that spiritual poverty was not the absence of value but the gateway to abundance, a paradox that the crowd had never been taught to understand. Those who recognize their emptiness are the ones who find themselves filled, for they come without pretense and with the expectation that God's provision is sufficient. The poor in spirit are like soil tilled and ready, receptive to the seeds of mercy, purity, and peace, prepared to receive blessings that cannot be measured in human terms. It is the admission of need that softens hearts, opens eyes, and aligns desires with the divine will, creating a foundation for transformation that begins within and radiates outward. Imagine a man who has spent his life climbing ladders, seeking approval, collecting achievements, only to feel an emptiness that no accolade can fill. When he hears these words, he begins to see that the blessing is not in the accumulation, but in the surrender, in the admission that his own efforts are insufficient to bring the fulfillment he craves. This realization is not easy. It demands courage to let go of self-reliance, to release the illusion of control, and to approach life with a heart willing to receive rather than demand. Yet it is precisely in this letting go that freedom and blessing unfold, revealing that the kingdom of heaven is not reserved for the competent, the strong, or the accomplished, but for those who admit their need and trust in God's sufficiency. From this starting point of spiritual poverty, the other Beatitudes gain their full meaning. Mourning is understood as a sacred response, not a weakness, because it flows from a heart that recognizes its need and the brokenness around it. Meekness is no longer passivity but strength under restraint, an ability to trust God rather than grasp for control. Hunger and thirst for righteousness emerge naturally from those who have admitted their emptiness and now long for fulfillment that can only be found in God's justice and holiness. Mercy flows from a heart that has received it first, purity from a life aligned with divine truth, peacemaking from the recognition that reconciliation matters more than winning, and even persecution for righteousness is seen as confirmation of alignment with the kingdom rather than mere suffering. The Beatitudes, beginning with this radical statement about spiritual poverty, weave together a narrative that challenges every assumption about power, success, and blessing. They invite the listener to enter a journey that begins with honesty about one's need, continues with transformation through surrender and longing, and culminates in a life that reflects God's values in ways the world often misunderstands, but that carry eternal significance. In this way, Jesus' message on that hillside was not only a teaching but an invitation, a call to step off the familiar path of self-sufficiency and into the profound freedom and fullness that arise from recognizing one's dependence on God. It is a starting point, a doorway, and the key that allows the soul to move from emptiness to true blessedness, setting the stage for every subsequent step along the path of the kingdom, where each promise flows naturally from the simple, yet revolutionary, truth that life begins not with what we have but with what we admit we lack. This is why the Beatitudes resonate across centuries, because the journey of spiritual poverty is timeless. It speaks to every heart that has known failure, disappointment, or the quiet ache of incompleteness, offering not shame but hope, not judgment but the invitation to receive the kingdom that belongs to those who acknowledge their need, open their hearts, and dare to trust in God's provision above all else. It is the first step, the foundation, and the lens through which all other blessings are understood, creating a narrative of transformation that begins with honesty, flows through surrender, and culminates in the richness of a life lived in alignment with God's eternal purposes. The hillside air was filled with a stillness that invited reflection, as if the earth itself had leaned in to listen to the words Jesus was about to speak. And among the crowd, there was a sense of expectancy that went beyond curiosity or casual interest. When he spoke of the poor in spirit, a path was laid out, a journey that began with humility and acknowledgement of human insufficiency. But it did not end there. As the words continued to flow, Jesus moved into a blessing that seemed, at first, paradoxical, yet carried a depth that touched the soul in ways few teachings could. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted, he said. And the simplicity of the phrase belied the profound spiritual truth embedded within it. Mourning, he suggested, was not a condition to be avoided or a weakness to be shunned. It was sacred, a recognition of the brokenness that permeates human existence and the longing for restoration that resides within the heart. The crowd, accustomed to equating blessing with outward success or avoidance of pain, might have paused in silent contemplation, as the weight of these words settled upon them. Mourning, as Jesus described it, was not mere sadness over fleeting disappointments or the trivial setbacks of daily life. It was a deep, honest grief over the realities of sin, injustice, and the imperfection of the world. It was the ache of the heart that refuses to numb itself, the cry of a soul that recognizes its own failings while yearning for the restoration of what has been lost. In that recognition, there was not despair but an opening, a sacred space where transformation could begin. For the presence of God meets the heart most fully when it is broken. when it is willing to confront the pain and acknowledge the things that demand change. Consider the person who has spent years chasing appearances, hiding faults, and pretending that everything is well, only to encounter an unshakable emptiness that no accomplishment can fill. The mourning Jesus spoke of is the surrender of that facade, the courage to look directly at one's own shortcomings and the suffering of the world, and to allow the heart to feel fully what it has previously sought to ignore. It is not indulgence in self-pity, but a sacred attentiveness to the truth of life, an embrace of vulnerability that opens the door to healing. Through mourning, the soul learns to let go of illusions of control and perfection, making space for God's comfort, which is not abstract or distant, but tangible, active, and life-transforming. As the crowd absorbed this teaching, they would have begun to see that mourning was not an isolated experience but part of a continuum that flowed naturally from spiritual poverty, the recognition of need that Jesus had first described. Those who understand their emptiness are prepared to feel the weight of the world and their own hearts, and in that space of vulnerability, they encounter the mercy and presence of God in ways that the proud or self-reliant cannot. Mourning becomes a pathway, a bridge between recognizing one's limitations and receiving the fullness of God's blessing. It softens hearts hardened by pride, tempers ambition with humility, and fosters a sensitivity to justice, compassion, and righteousness. The promise that those who mourn shall be comforted carries with it both reassurance and a call to engagement with life's deeper realities. Comfort, in this context, is not a temporary relief from sorrow or a fleeting distraction from grief. It is the transformative presence of God working within, reshaping hearts, and redirecting desires toward what is eternal and true. The mourner learns to move through pain with awareness rather than avoidance, to embrace the truth of human suffering without succumbing to despair, and to participate actively in the renewal of the soul through God's guidance. It is through this sacred mourning that one's heart becomes attuned to mercy, purity, and peacemaking, for each subsequent beatitude finds its foundation in the willingness to feel deeply, grieve honestly, and seek God's intervention in the midst of brokenness. Picture a mother who has witnessed injustice in her community, or an individual who has wrestled with personal failings, or a young person confronting the weight of loss for the first time. In each of these, the mourning Jesus describes is both invitation and instruction. It is an acknowledgement that life is not as it should be, and that change must begin within before it can radiate outward. The blessing is not in avoiding sorrow, but in approaching it with honesty and surrender, allowing the heart to be molded by divine presence and to emerge with a capacity for compassion, insight, and resilience that is otherwise unattainable. Through this lens, mourning is reframed from a mark of weakness to a sacred conduit of transformation, linking the recognition of need with the deeper experience of God's comfort. The pathway is continuous. Spiritual poverty opens the heart, mourning deepens a receptivity, and each subsequent beatitude builds upon the vulnerability and honesty cultivated in this sacred grief. In this way, Jesus reveals that blessing is not a superficial reward for ease or privilege, but the fruit of a life willing to confront brokenness and allow God's presence to bring renewal and hope. The Beatitudes, seen in this progression, create a narrative of profound spiritual formation, where comfort emerges not as consolation, but as the tangible manifestation of God's love entering the spaces of sorrow, reshaping the heart, and preparing it for mercy, purity, and peace. Mourning, therefore, is not simply an emotion to endure or a stage to pass through. It is a sacred practice, a divine invitation to allow grief to open the soul, to feel the weight of sin and injustice, and to experience transformation through God's nearness. It is in this depth of engagement with life's brokenness that comfort and blessing converge, revealing a richness of soul and a perspective of eternity that redefines what it means to be truly blessed. As the crowd listened in the warmth of the afternoon sun, the words Jesus spoke continued to unravel the expectations they carried from a world that celebrated boldness, dominance, and visible success. And in their place, he presented a vision that was both radical and disorienting, revealing a kingdom where true strength was often hidden and the pursuit of righteousness demanded a depth of longing that the casual observer could scarcely comprehend. When he spoke of the meek, the people would have had to pause and reconsider their understanding of power. For in the Roman-occupied world, meekness was not admired. It was seen as weakness, a lack of ambition, a susceptibility to being trampled by those who seized advantage without conscience. Yet Jesus reframed it entirely, presenting meekness not as passivity, but as strength under control, a deliberate choice to trust God's justice rather than asserting one's own, to restrain the impulse for revenge, to act with intentionality rather than reaction, and to place faith above self-interest. In those listening, some might have thought of David sparing Saul in the cave, or of prophets who spoke truth to kings, risking their own safety while submitting to a higher purpose. And in this understanding, the meek were revealed not as powerless, but as strategically strong, guided by a profound awareness that the earth belongs to those who act in alignment with divine will rather than human ambition. Jesus then extended this idea further, moving seamlessly into the blessing for those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, a spiritual appetite that could not be satisfied with mere appearances, easy compromises, or temporary pleasures. Hunger, he illustrated, was not mild curiosity or polite interest, but a desperate craving that consumed the soul, a relentless pursuit of holiness and justice that propelled the heart toward God even when the path was difficult or the world seemed indifferent. Those who longed for righteousness were often those who recognized the disparity between the ideals of the kingdom and the realities around them, who wept over injustice, who felt the pang of their own failings, and who could not settle for the superficial solutions offered by society. Their hunger was a driving force, shaping their choices, guiding their actions, and molding their character in ways that external achievement or recognition could never accomplish. It was the kind of hunger that led one to confront personal shortcomings, to advocate for those who could not advocate for themselves, and to pursue integrity even when doing so invited criticism or persecution. Imagine the artisan who labors with care, knowing that the beauty of their work will never earn them fame, yet continues for the sake of excellence and purpose, or the activist who persists in seeking justice in a system stacked against them, driven not by applause but by the inner call of righteousness. In each, the hunger for goodness mirrors the spiritual longing that Jesus blessed, revealing the invisible currents of faith that carry a person toward fulfillment beyond worldly measures. Meekness and hunger intertwine, for the strength to restrain oneself in the face of provocation is reinforced by the desire to see righteousness fulfilled, and the pursuit of holiness gains clarity when one trusts in God's timing rather than immediate gratification. In this interconnection, the Beatitudes form a tapestry of transformation, where spiritual poverty opens the heart, mourning deepens empathy, meekness cultivates disciplined strength, and hunger fuels perseverance in the pursuit of what is holy. This dynamic also illuminates the contrast between the kingdom of God and the values of the world, where power is often measured by dominance, success by wealth, and influence by visibility. Jesus presents a counterintuitive reality where those who seem small or overlooked are in fact heirs of the earth, where restraint is a form of mastery, and where longing for righteousness leads to a fulfillment that cannot be manufactured by ambition or social climbing. The humility inherent in meekness allows the hungry heart to recognize dependence on God, transforming frustration with personal limitations into a steady resolve to pursue goodness. justice, and mercy. It is in this space that character is forged, where the heart learns patience and discernment, where desires are refined from self-serving impulses into godly pursuits, and where every act of restraint or righteous hunger becomes a step on the path toward eternal reward. Consider the farmer who plants seeds in hope of a harvest he may never see, the teacher who invests in students whose potential is not immediately evident, or the caregiver who tends to those who cannot repay them. In these ordinary yet profound acts, the meek and those hungering for righteousness embody the invisible power of the kingdom, demonstrating that influence and fulfillment arise not from coercion or assertion, but from alignment with divine principles and the cultivation of a disciplined, longing heart. The Beatitudes, seen through this lens, guide the listener toward a life where restraint is strength, where the pursuit of righteousness transforms the self and impacts the world, and where the rewards of the kingdom are realized not through conquest, but through faithfulness, patience, and devotion to what is just and holy. In essence, meekness teaches that power is not the measure of blessing, while hunger for righteousness reveals that longing for God and His principles is the gateway to fulfillment. Together, they form a foundation for spiritual maturity, an enduring path that challenges worldly assumptions, cultivates integrity, and prepares the heart to receive the immeasurable blessings that follow a life surrendered to divine purpose. Through these teachings, Jesus calls each as listener to a radical reevaluation of what it means to be strong, fulfilled, and blessed, offering a vision of life where true greatness is hidden in humility and eternal satisfaction is found in the relentless pursuit of what is right, holy, and aligned with God's eternal kingdom. As Jesus continued to speak to the crowd, His words wove together a vision of life that was profoundly countercultural, one in which the metrics of the world's success, acclaim, and outward appearances were replaced by a deeper, unseen reality where the condition of the heart mattered more than the accolades one could amass or the image one could project. He spoke of mercy not as an abstract ideal or a passive virtue, but as a reflection of God's own character, a tangible expression of grace that flows outward from a heart that has known forgiveness and transformation. Mercy, He taught, is not simply sparing others from punishment, nor is it condoning wrongdoing. It is an active engagement with another person's suffering, a choice to step into their pain, to offer compassion without expectation, and to extend the same kindness that one has received from God, even when it comes at personal cost or invites misunderstanding. Those who live mercifully mirror the divine, and in doing so, they cultivate an inner life that is rich, resilient, and capable of reflecting light into dark corners where justice alone might fail to reach. In illustrating mercy, Jesus painted scenes familiar to His audience: a father running to embrace a wayward child before an apology is complete, a neighbor offering help to someone shunned by society, or a community member speaking on behalf of the oppressed, not out of obligation, but because they recognize the sacred worth of every person. In each instance, mercy is not weakness. It is a conscious alignment with God's will, a demonstration that one's heart has been softened by grace and is capable of offering hope where bitterness might otherwise take root. The blessing of mercy is deeply intertwined with spiritual insight. For those who understand what it is to be forgiven cannot help but extend the same consideration to others, creating a ripple effect of kindness that transcends human calculation and mirrors the infinite generosity of the divine. Moving from mercy, Jesus turned the attention of the crowd to purity of heart, a concept that, in their cultural context, might have been easily misunderstood as mere ritual cleanliness or outward conformity to religious norms. Yet He described purity not as a matter of external appearance or perfection, but as a state of integrity, sincerity, and undivided devotion to God, a heart oriented toward truth and holiness rather than performance or approval. To be pure in heart is to live authentically, acknowledging the complexities, failures, and longings within oneself while maintaining an unwavering desire for God's presence to shape every thought, intention, and action. This purity is not about avoiding mistakes. It is about pursuing God with a depth of longing that allows no part of life to remain compartmentalized or unexamined, where inner motives align with divine purpose and every choice reflects an openness to transformation. Through stories and parables, Jesus conveyed how purity manifests in everyday life, the repentant individual who seeks reconciliation rather than hiding their failings, the believer who acts with honesty and courage even when no one is watching, and the community member whose decisions are guided by a desire for truth rather than personal gain. Such purity requires courage, because it demands vulnerability and honesty, exposing the hidden corners of the heart to God's refining presence. And it invites a clarity of vision that enables one to perceive God's work in the ordinary, as well as the extraordinary. Those who cultivate this purity are promised a profound reward, the ability to see God, not only in the distant future, but in the quiet moments of life, in answered prayers, and in the subtle ways divine guidance manifests in everyday circumstances. Mercy and purity, though distinct, are inseparable in the tapestry of spiritual formation Jesus outlined. For a heart softened by mercy is naturally inclined toward sincerity, and a heart purified by devotion is equipped to extend grace freely and wisely. In weaving these teachings together, Jesus revealed a pathway where outward behavior flows from inward transformation, where moral and spiritual character is measured not by adherence to rules or public acclaim, but by the authenticity of one's engagement with God and with others. It is a life that challenges superficial judgments, a calling to look beyond appearances and to cultivate an inner alignment that reflects the very nature of the divine. In applying these principles to daily living, one sees that mercy and purity require deliberate choices and persistent effort, forgiving when resentment tempts, offering compassion when anger would be easier, speaking truth with love, acting justly while remaining humble, and continually examining one's own motives to ensure they are guided by devotion rather than self-interest. These actions may go unnoticed by the world, yet they accumulate to form a life that radiates blessing, a life in which the hidden power of meekness, the hunger for righteousness, and the commitment to mercy and purity converge into a profound witness of God's kingdom. Ultimately, Jesus' teachings on mercy and purity reveal that blessings are not contingent on status, recognition, or outward achievement, but on the transformation of the heart and the intentional alignment of life with God's principles. Those who embrace these values reflect the divine character, cultivating a depth of spiritual vision and a capacity for authentic love and justice that is impervious to worldly measures of success. In following this path, every act of mercy and every pursuit of purity becomes a step toward the divine vision Jesus presented, a life where the invisible virtues shape reality, where the heart is cultivated as a mirror of God, and where the blessings of the kingdom unfold in ways both immediate and eternal, offering a clarity of purpose and a fulfillment that the world cannot provide. As Jesus continued his teaching on the hillside, he painted a world that operated according to principles vastly different from those the crowd had known, a world where true influence and blessing were measured not by dominance, status, or control, but by the quiet, often unseen work of reconciliation and the courageous act of bridging divides that had long seemed insurmountable. In a society accustomed to hierarchy, power, and the assertion of authority, the idea that peacemakers, those who actively seek to restore relationships rather than simply avoid conflict, would be honored as children of God must have sounded revolutionary. Yet, Jesus explained that peacemaking was not a passive or easy path. It demanded engagement with tension, patience in the face of hostility, and a willingness to confront brokenness without seeking personal vindication. It was an invitation to step into the messy, complicated reality of human relationships, to stand in the gap where others had built walls, and to act as instruments of God's restorative work in a world fraught with division and pain. He described peacemakers not as individuals who kept the status quo, avoiding discomfort for the sake of convenience or social harmony, but as those who, with intentionality and courage, brought healing where there was hurt, connection where there was alienation, and understanding where there had been misunderstanding. These peacemakers were willing to speak truth with love, to listen when their instincts urged them to judge, and to act with humility even when the response might be indifference or rejection. Their reward was not immediate or material, nor was it guaranteed to be recognized by society. Instead, it was a reflection of the divine character, a confirmation that their lives echoed the nature of God, who had reconciled the world to himself through grace and sacrificial love. In illustrating this principle, Jesus might have evoked familiar examples from his listeners' own lives: a family torn apart by conflict finding the courage to forgive, neighbors resolving long-standing disputes through dialogue and empathy, or communities extending help to those once considered enemies. Each act of reconciliation, though often unseen or undervalued by the world, contributed to the manifestation of God's kingdom on earth, revealing the profound truth that peace is not merely the absence of conflict, but the active presence of justice, mercy, and love. Jesus made it clear that pursuing peace required strength, discernment, and perseverance. For true peacemaking is rarely convenient or simple. It demands vulnerability, as those who attempt to reconcile must often expose their own hearts to potential hurt or misjudgment. Yet the process transforms both the giver and the receiver. By entering spaces of tension, confronting brokenness with grace, and seeking to restore what has been fractured, peacemakers participate in a divine work that transcends human understanding. Their lives testify to the power of humility over pride, forgiveness over retaliation, and dialogue over silence. In doing, they not only reflect God's nature but also create ripples of reconciliation that extend far beyond the immediate situation, influencing families, communities, and even societies in ways that mirror the expansive reach of divine love. The path of the peacemaker is also deeply connected to the previous Beatitudes. For mercy, purity of heart, and the hunger for righteousness naturally lead one toward the work of reconciliation. Those who have experienced mercy are equipped to extend it. Those who pursue purity of heart are motivated to act with integrity and honesty in restoring relationships. And those hungering for righteousness are compelled to confront injustice with compassion rather than anger. Each previous step in the spiritual journey cultivates the character needed to navigate the complexities of peacemaking, transforming what might initially seem like a moral obligation into an authentic expression of a life aligned with God's vision. In this way, peacemaking is both the fruit and the demonstration of an inward transformation, a sign that the kingdom is taking root in the hearts of those who seek to live according to divine principles. Jesus' teaching also emphasized that peacemaking is often counterintuitive to human instincts, as the natural response to conflict is frequently withdrawal, retaliation, or avoidance. Yet he insisted that stepping into conflict with the intent to restore, rather than to dominate or control, reflects the very essence of God's kingdom. It requires an understanding that true authority is exercised through humility, that influence is most profound when it serves rather than demands, and that enduring impact is found in lifting others rather than asserting oneself. In every encounter where reconciliation is chosen over revenge, where dialogue is chosen over silence, and where understanding is chosen over judgment, the character of God is made visible, and the believer participates in a living testament to the principles of heaven on earth. Ultimately, Jesus' words on peacemaking reveal a radical inversion of worldly logic. Those who actively seek to heal divisions, to build bridges across divides, and to pursue restoration in relationships are not weak or naive, but strong and courageous, embodying the very nature of God in their daily lives. The blessing promised to peacemakers being called children of God is both a recognition and a reward, affirming that their efforts reflect the heart of the divine and contribute to the realization of a kingdom that operates on mercy, justice, and love rather than force and fear. Living as a peacemaker means embracing this calling with intentionality, patience, and humility, understanding that every act of reconciliation, no matter how small or unseen, participates in the unfolding of God's redemptive work in the world, revealing that true influence and lasting impact flow from the courage to restore, the patience to endure, and the wisdom to reflect God's character in every interaction. As Jesus concluded his teaching on the hillside, the final beatitude resonated like a trumpet in the hearts of those who were listening. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It was a promise that startled many, because unlike the other blessings that spoke to sorrow, humility, and the pursuit of goodness, this one acknowledged the very real cost of living faithfully in a world that often resists what is right. To be persecuted for standing in alignment with God's will was not a sign of failure, nor an indication that the kingdom had abandoned them. Rather, it was a confirmation that they were walking the path Jesus had outlined, a path that began with surrender, continued through mercy, purity, and peacemaking, and culminated in steadfast devotion even in the face of opposition. The crowd may have shifted uncomfortably as these words sank in, realizing that the pursuit of holiness and justice would not always earn applause, and sometimes would bring misunderstanding, ridicule, or outright hostility. Yet, Jesus' message carried a profound encouragement. Persecution is not a punishment but a marker. It signals that one's life reflects the values of a kingdom not built on human acclaim but on divine truth. When the world misunderstands, mocks, or resists the pursuit of righteousness, it is not a reflection of inadequacy, but of the light breaking through the shadows. Those who endure with patience, love, and unwavering faith demonstrate that their hope is anchored in something far greater than temporary comfort or recognition. Through persecution, the believer discovers resilience, the depth of God's presence, and the power of a life surrendered entirely to divine guidance. Just as the poor in spirit are invited into the kingdom at the beginning of the spiritual journey, those who stand firm under opposition at the end of the journey are confirmed as heirs of eternal reward, experiencing the fullness of the blessings that Jesus has promised throughout the Beatitudes. Throughout Scripture, the lives of faithful individuals illustrate this truth. Prophets, apostles, and ordinary believers alike faced trials, rejection, and suffering, yet their faithfulness left a lasting imprint, shaping history and inspiring generations. They endured scorn for speaking truth, persevered when their integrity was questioned, and continued to act in love when hatred surrounded them. Their reward was not always visible in the moment, but it was certain, woven into the eternal narrative of God's kingdom. Jesus' words invite us to view opposition not as a sign of inadequacy, but as an opportunity for growth, a refining process through which character, patience, and faith are deepened. By choosing obedience over comfort, courage over avoidance, and integrity over compromise, the persecuted participate in a divine story that transcends time, leaving a legacy that echoes far beyond personal experience. This final beatitude also unites and completes the spiritual journey Jesus outlined. From the recognition of spiritual poverty to mourning, meekness, hunger for righteousness, mercy, purity of heart, and peacemaking, each step prepares the believer to endure challenges with grace and hope, without experiencing humility and dependence on God. One cannot withstand trials with the same clarity of purpose. Without cultivating mercy and purity, opposition can embitter and blind. Without seeking peace, persecution may crush rather than refine. Jesus' teaching is therefore holistic, showing that a life aligned with divine values equips one to face not only the blessings of joy and comfort, but also the inevitability of struggle and resistance. Endurance in the face of persecution is both a test and a testament, affirming that those who walk faithfully in God's ways are never truly abandoned, even when the world pushes back. As we reflect on the Beatitudes and their culmination in this promise, we are invited to consider our own lives. Where do we encounter opposition for standing for what is right? How do we respond when our faith, values, or convictions are challenged? Do we seek comfort in conformity? Or do we embrace the risk of living authentically in alignment with God's kingdom? The encouragement is clear. Faithfulness, even when costly, is never waste. Every act of integrity, every choice to pursue justice, every moment of mercy and reconciliation contributes to the unfolding of a kingdom that cannot be shaken. The ultimate reward is not merely recognition or earthly success, but eternal participation in a reality shaped by divine love, justice, and truth. As we conclude this exploration of the Beatitudes, let us carry their lessons forward, not as abstract ideas but as living principles. Let us welcome spiritual poverty as the starting point. Embrace mourning as a pathway to transformation. Practice meekness. Hunger for righteousness. Extend mercy. Cultivate purity. Actively seek peace. And stand faithfully even in the face of persecution. Each beatitude invites a deeper surrender, a greater trust, and a fuller reflection of God's heart in the world around us. As we walk this path, we discover that blessings are not distant promises but lived experiences, revealing God's presence, shaping our character, and inviting us into a joy and fulfillment that the world cannot offer. Thank you for joining this journey through Jesus' words. If this exploration stirred your heart, inspired reflection, or challenged your perspective, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more soul-deep teachings, and share it with someone who might need encouragement today. Let the Beatitudes guide your steps, transform your heart, and remind you that even in opposition, you are blessed, loved, and part of a kingdom that cannot be shaken.